The morning sun cast long shadows across the tarmac at Denver International Airport as Staff Sergeant Marcus Rodriguez adjusted his dress uniform one final time. His hands trembled slightly as he smoothed down the crisp fabric, not from nerves about flying but from the weight of the responsibility that lay ahead of him. Today, he would escort fallen soldier Private First Class Danny Mitchell home to his family in small-town Nebraska. Marcus had volunteered for escort duty many times before, but this mission felt different. Danny was only 19 years old, just 2 years younger than Marcus himself when he first enlisted. The young soldier had been killed by an improvised explosive device while on patrol in Afghanistan, leaving behind a devastated family and a community that had watched him grow up playing Little League baseball and volunteering. At the local fire department, the airline staff at the check-in counter recognized Marcus immediately. His military dress uniform, complete with white gloves and polished brass, signaled the solemn nature of his journey. The gate agent, a middle-aged woman named Sarah, had handled these situations before. She knew the protocol and the importance of treating these flights with the utmost respect and dignity. Marcus carried with him a folder containing Danny's military records, personal effects, and most importantly, letters from Danny's family that he had never had the chance to read. Danny's mother, Mrs. Mitchell, had insisted that Marcus take them, hoping that somehow her son would know he was loved even in his final journey home. The weight of that folder felt heavier than any equipment Marcus had ever carried in combat. As Marcus made his way through security, TSA agents quietly stepped aside, offering respectful nods. Word had already spread through the airport staff about the nature of his travel. Airport employees lined the corridors, some placing their hands over their hearts as he passed. The usual hustle and bustle of morning travel seemed to quiet in his presence, as if the entire airport understood the gravity of the moment. At the gate, Marcus took a seat away from the other passengers. He opened the folder and began reading through Danny's service record. The young soldier had been an exemplary serviceman, earning commendations for his dedication to his unit and his willingness to help fellow soldiers. His commanding officers had written glowing reports about his character and his commitment to the mission, but it was the personal items that truly revealed who Danny had been. There were photos of him with his family at Christmas, laughing with his younger sister as they built a snowman. Pictures from his high school graduation showed a proud young man surrounded by loving parents and grandparents. A worn baseball card collection revealed his childhood dreams and innocent pleasures. Marcus found himself thinking about his own family back in Texas. His mother had cried when he enlisted, terrified that she might one day receive the same knock on the door that Danny's family had received. His father, a Vietnam veteran, had been proud but worried. Marcus understood now, more than ever, the true cost of service and the ripple effects that one soldier's sacrifice could have on countless lives. The boarding announcement interrupted his thoughts. As an escort, Marcus would board first, ensuring that he could oversee the careful transfer of Danny's remains to the aircraft. He gathered his belongings and approached the gate agent, who handed him a special boarding pass and offered a quiet word of thanks for his service. Walking down the jet bridge, Marcus felt the eyes of other passengers on him. Some recognized immediately what his presence meant, while others seemed curious about the formally dressed soldier boarding ahead of everyone else. He took his assigned seat in the front of the aircraft, where he could maintain visual contact with the cargo hold area, where Danny's flag-draped casket would be secured. The flight crew had been briefed about their special passenger. The captain, a former military pilot himself, had requested a moment of silence over the intercom once all passengers were seated. Flight attendants moved with extra care and respect, understanding that this flight carried more than just travelers. It carried a family's grief and a nation's gratitude. As other passengers boarded, Marcus noticed a mix of reactions. Some approached him quietly to express their thanks. Others simply nodded respectfully. A few seemed uncomfortable, perhaps confronted for the first time with the reality of military sacrifice. One elderly gentleman wearing a Vietnam veteran's cap stopped to shake Marcus's hand and whispered a few words about his own experiences escorting fallen comrades decades ago. Marcus watched through the small window as ground crew members carefully loaded Danny's casket into the cargo hold. The flag draped over the casket fluttered slightly in the morning breeze, and Marcus felt his throat tighten with emotion. This was someone's son, someone's future, Someone's dreams all contained within that solemn wooden box. The pilot's voice came over the intercom, informing passengers that they would be carrying a fallen soldier home today. He asked for a moment of silence in honor of Private First Class Danny Mitchell's service and sacrifice. The entire cabin fell quiet, and Marcus could hear only the gentle hum of the aircraft's systems and the distant sounds of airport operations outside. As the plane pushed back from the gate and began its taxi toward the runway, Marcus closed his eyes and said a silent prayer for Danny and his family. He thought about the reception that would await them in Nebraska, the honor guard, the grieving family, the community that would turn out to welcome their hometown hero home one final time. The aircraft lifted off smoothly into the Colorado sky, beginning the journey that would take Danny Mitchell home to the people who loved him most. Marcus settled back in his seat, knowing that the most challenging part of his mission still lay ahead. Soon he would have to look into the eyes of parents who had lost their child and somehow find the words to honor both their grief and their son's service. Outside his window, the Rocky Mountains stretched endlessly toward the horizon, their peaks touching the morning sky like silent sentinels standing guard over the journey below. The flight to Omaha proceeded smoothly for the first 2 hours. Marcus had been reviewing Danny's personal effects when the captain's voice crackled over the intercom, with an announcement that would change everything. Due to severe weather conditions moving across the Midwest, their flight would be diverted to Kansas City International Airport until the storms passed through Nebraska. Marcus felt his stomach drop. This wasn't just an inconvenience. It was a disruption to a carefully planned military funeral with precise timing. Danny's family was expecting their son to arrive at a specific time, and the honor guard, funeral directors, and hundreds of community members had arranged their schedules around that arrival. More importantly, Danny's elderly grandfather, a World War II veteran who had specifically requested to be present for his grandson's homecoming, was in failing health and might not survive another delay. As the plane descended toward Kansas City, Marcus immediately began making phone calls to military officials and the funeral home in Nebraska. The weather reports were grim. The storm system was massive and could potentially ground flights for 12 to 24 hours. Every minute of delay meant more anguish for a family that had already endured the unthinkable. Upon landing at Kansas City International, Marcus faced his first real challenge. The airline staff informed him that due to the emergency diversion, there were complications with continuing Danny's escort. The aircraft needed to refuel. The crew was approaching their maximum duty hours, and the complex logistics of transferring a fallen soldier's remains between flights required coordination with multiple agencies. Marcus found himself standing in the airport's operations center, surrounded by airline officials, TSA supervisors, and airport managers, all trying to determine the best course of action. The bureaucratic maze was overwhelming, with each department having different procedures and requirements for handling the situation. That's when Marcus first encountered security guard Thomas Washington, a 62-year-old former Marine who had been working at Kansas City International for 15 years. Thomas had noticed the commotion and the young soldier in dress, uniform looking increasingly frustrated as officials debated procedures and timelines. Thomas approached the group quietly and asked if he could speak with Marcus privately. Away from the crowd of officials, Thomas introduced himself and explained that he had served 2 tours in Vietnam and understood the sacred nature of Marcus's mission. He had witnessed many escort situations over his years at the airport and knew that sometimes the system failed to prioritize what truly mattered. "Son," Thomas said, his weathered hands clasped behind his back in a familiar military stance. "I've seen this before. These folks mean well, but they're thinking about liability and procedures. You're thinking about getting that boy home to his family. Those are 2 different missions." Marcus explained the situation with Danny's grandfather and the community waiting in Nebraska. Thomas listened intently, his expression growing more determined with each detail. When Marcus finished, Thomas simply nodded and said, "Follow me. We're going to fix this." What happened next surprised everyone in the operations center. Thomas walked directly to the chief of airport operations and requested an immediate meeting. Using his 15 years of credibility and his status as a veteran, Thomas laid out the situation in clear, uncompromising terms. He explained that every hour of delay was causing additional pain to a Gold Star family and disrespecting the sacrifice of a fallen soldier. Thomas proposed a solution that no one else had considered. Kansas City International had a small fleet of charter aircraft that were sometimes used for emergency medical transports. These planes could handle the weather conditions better than commercial airlines and could provide a direct flight to the smaller regional airport near Danny's hometown, eliminating the need for the larger Omaha airport and the subsequent ground transport. The proposal faced immediate resistance from airline officials who cited insurance concerns, liability issues, and the complex federal regulations governing the transport of human remains. Thomas listened patiently to each objection, then systematically addressed every concern with his deep knowledge of airport operations and military protocols. Marcus watched in amazement as this security guard, whom he had known for less than an hour, fought harder for Danny Mitchell than some officials who were paid to handle these situations. Thomas made phone call after phone call, reaching out to contacts he had built over 15 years of service. He spoke with charter pilots, medical transport coordinators, and even called a retired Air Force colonel who worked with the Department of Defense on escort protocols. During this time, Marcus learned more about Thomas's background. The older man had lost his own son in Iraq 8 years earlier and had dedicated his remaining years to ensuring that other fallen soldiers received the respect and care they deserved. Thomas had personally assisted with over 40 escort situations, often using his own time and resources to solve problems that others deemed impossible. As the afternoon wore on, Thomas continued to work tirelessly on Danny's behalf. He navigated bureaucratic obstacles with the skill of someone who had spent decades understanding how systems worked, and more importantly, how they could be made to work for the right reasons. He filled out forms, made calls to federal agencies, and even contacted his congressman's office to expedite certain approvals. Marcus found himself growing emotional as he watched this stranger sacrifice his day, and potentially his job, to help bring Danny home. When Marcus tried to thank him, Thomas simply shook his head and said, "This is what we do for each other. Your boy served his country, and now it's our turn to serve him." By late afternoon, Thomas had accomplished what seemed impossible. He had arranged for a charter medical transport aircraft, complete with all necessary certifications for carrying human remains, to fly Marcus and Danny directly to Nebraska. The flight would leave within 2 hours, arriving in time for the original funeral schedule. As Marcus prepared to transfer to the charter flight, airport employees had begun to gather. Word of Thomas's efforts had spread throughout the terminal, and workers from every department came to pay their respects as Danny's casket was transferred to the smaller aircraft. Baggage handlers removed their caps, TSA agents stood at attention, and even passengers in the terminal stopped to observe the solemn procession. Thomas accompanied Marcus to the charter aircraft, ensuring that every detail was perfect. As they walked across the tarmac, Thomas shared stories about other escorts he had helped, always focusing on the families and the importance of bringing soldiers home with dignity and honor. The charter aircraft Thomas had arranged was a small medical transport plane, typically used for emergency patient transfers between hospitals. The pilot, Captain Jennifer Hayes, was a former Air Force officer who had volunteered her services at no charge when she learned about the situation. She had flown similar missions before and understood the profound responsibility of transporting fallen soldiers. As Marcus supervised the careful loading of Danny's casket onto the smaller aircraft, Thomas stood nearby, coordinating with ground crew members who had volunteered to stay past their shifts to ensure everything went perfectly. The older security guard had removed his uniform jacket and was helping personally, treating Danny's casket with the same reverence he would have shown for his own son. During the loading process, Marcus noticed something remarkable happening around them. Airport employees who had finished their shifts were choosing to stay and witness the departure. Maintenance workers, food service staff, gate agents, and even janitors had gathered at a respectful distance. Many of them were veterans themselves, and they recognized the significance of what was taking place. Thomas had quietly spread word through the airport's employee network about Danny's story and the importance of getting him home to his family. What had started as a logistical problem had transformed into something much more meaningful, a community of airport workers coming together to honor a fallen soldier they had never met but whose sacrifice they deeply understood. As the final preparations were made, Thomas approached Marcus with a small wooden box. Inside was an American flag that had been folded with military precision. Thomas explained that it was a flag that had flown over the Kansas City airport for the past year, and he wanted Danny's family to have it as a symbol of gratitude from everyone who had helped bring their son home. "Every person who touched this mission today," Thomas said quietly, "from the pilots to the baggage handlers to the folks in operations, they all wanted to do something for your soldier. This flag represents all of us." Marcus accepted the flag with trembling hands, deeply moved by the gesture. He had escorted fallen soldiers before, but he had never experienced this level of personal commitment from civilians who had no obligation to help beyond their basic job duties. Thomas and his colleagues had turned what could have been a bureaucratic nightmare into a profound demonstration of respect and honor. Captain Hayes approached them as the final safety checks were completed. She had filed a special flight plan that would take them directly over several small towns where local VFW posts and American Legion chapters had been notified of their passage. These communities had organized brief memorial gatherings, and people would step outside to observe the aircraft carrying their fallen hero home. The flight itself was smooth and peaceful. Marcus sat in the small passenger area, while Captain Hayes piloted the aircraft through clear evening skies. Through the small windows he could see the lights of small towns scattered across the Kansas and Nebraska landscape, each one representing communities filled with people who understood the cost of freedom and the value of service. During the flight, Marcus reflected on the extraordinary chain of events that had brought them to this point. A severe weather delay that had threatened to disrupt Danny's homecoming had instead led to an outpouring of support from complete strangers. Thomas Washington, a security guard who could have simply directed them to wait in the airport like any other stranded passengers, had instead moved heaven and earth to solve their problem. As they crossed into Nebraska airspace, Captain Hayes contacted the tower at the regional airport where Danny's family was waiting. The original commercial flight had been canceled due to weather, but word had somehow reached the family that their son was still coming home on schedule. Marcus later learned that Thomas had personally called the funeral director to ensure the family knew about the new arrangements. The landing at the small Nebraska airport was unlike anything Marcus had ever experienced. Despite the late hour and the weather challenges of the day, hundreds of people had gathered to welcome Danny home. The airport's single runway was lined with fire trucks, police cars, and military vehicles, all with their emergency lights flashing in silent tribute. As the aircraft rolled to a stop, Marcus could see Danny's family standing with the honor guard near the terminal building. His parents, Robert and Linda Mitchell, stood holding each other, their faces showing both grief and relief that their son was finally home. Danny's younger sister, Sarah, was there too, clutching a small American flag and wearing one of Danny's high school baseball jerseys. But it was the sight of Danny's grandfather that truly moved Marcus. The elderly World War II veteran, despite his failing health, had insisted on being present for his grandson's arrival. He sat in a wheelchair, wearing his own military dress uniform from 7 decades earlier, with medals that told the story of his service in the Pacific Theater. As Marcus emerged from the aircraft, he was greeted by the Honor Guard commander, Master Sergeant Patricia Collins, who had been coordinating the local arrangements. She briefed him quickly on the ceremony that would follow: the formal transfer of Danny's remains to the Honor Guard, the presentation of the flag to his family, and the procession to the funeral home where Danny would rest until his service the following day. The ceremony itself was conducted with military precision and heartfelt emotion. As Danny's casket was transferred from the aircraft to the Honor Guard's ceremonial hearse, a bugler played taps while the crowd stood in absolute silence. The only sounds were the gentle Nebraska wind and the quiet sobbing of family members saying goodbye to their beloved son and grandson. When the formal ceremony concluded, Marcus approached Danny's family to present them with his personal effects and the flag that Thomas had sent from Kansas City. As he handed the folded flag to Danny's mother, he shared the story of how dozens of airport employees had volunteered their time to ensure Danny made it home on schedule. Mrs. Mitchell accepted the flag with tears in her eyes, but then she surprised Marcus by asking about Thomas Washington. She wanted to know more about the man who had done so much for her son, a soldier he had never met. Marcus told her about Thomas's own loss and his dedication to helping other military families, describing how the security guard had refused to accept any recognition for his efforts. The following morning brought clear skies and a crisp Nebraska autumn day for Danny Mitchell's funeral service. The small town of Millbrook had prepared for weeks to honor their fallen hero, with local businesses closing their doors and schools dismissing students so the entire community could participate in saying goodbye to one of their own. Marcus had spent the night at a local hotel, where he had been unable to sleep. He kept thinking about the events of the previous day and the extraordinary efforts of Thomas Washington. Before dawn, he had written a detailed report to his commanding officer, recommending Thomas for recognition from the Department of Defense for his service to military families. The funeral service was held at Millbrook High School's gymnasium, the only building in town large enough to accommodate the expected crowd. Danny had graduated from the same school just 2 years earlier, where he had played baseball and volunteered with the drama club. His former teachers, coaches, and classmates had all come to pay their respects to the young man who had chosen to serve his country. As Marcus took his place with the honor guard, he noticed that the gymnasium was filled beyond capacity. People stood along the walls and in the doorways, while others gathered outside to listen to the service through speakers that had been set up in the parking lot. The entire town had turned out, along with veterans from surrounding communities who had driven hours to honor Danny's sacrifice. During the service, Danny's high school baseball coach spoke about the young man's character and determination. His former English teacher read a poem that Danny had written about service and sacrifice during his senior year. His younger sister Sarah delivered a moving tribute about her big brother's dreams and his desire to make a difference in the world, but it was Danny's grandfather who delivered the most powerful moment of the service. Despite his frail condition, the elderly veteran insisted on speaking about his grandson's choice to serve. With a voice that grew stronger as he spoke, he told the congregation about the proud tradition of military service in their family and how Danny had always looked up to the veterans in his life. My grandson understood something that not everyone his age understands, the grandfather said, gripping the podium for support. He knew that freedom isn't free, and he was willing to pay the price so that others could live in safety and peace. That's not just courage, that's love for your fellow human beings. After the service, the procession to the cemetery stretched for over 2 miles through the heart of Millbrook. Fire trucks, police cars, and military vehicles led the way, followed by Danny's hearse and dozens of cars carrying family and friends. Along the entire route, people lined the streets holding flags and placing their hands over their hearts as Danny passed by one final time. At the cemetery, the military honor ceremony was conducted with the precision and dignity that Danny deserved. The honor guard performed the flag-folding ceremony, while a bugler played taps from a small hill overlooking the gravesite. When the folded flag was presented to Danny's mother, she clutched it to her chest and whispered words of love and pride for her son. As the ceremony concluded and the crowd began to disperse, Marcus found himself approached by a local news reporter who had been covering the story. The reporter, Jessica Martinez from the regional television station, had heard about the extraordinary efforts to get Danny home and wanted to share the story with a wider audience. Marcus was initially reluctant to be interviewed, feeling that the focus should remain on Danny and his family, rather than on the logistics of his escort mission. But Mrs. Mitchell overheard the conversation and encouraged Marcus to tell the story, particularly the part about Thomas Washington's efforts at the Kansas City airport. "People need to know," she said, her voice still thick with emotion from the funeral service. "They need to know that there are still people in this world who will go above and beyond for a stranger, especially for someone who served our country. That man in Kansas City, he's a hero too." Marcus agreed to the interview, and over the next 30 minutes he recounted the events of the previous day. He described how Thomas had refused to accept the bureaucratic delays and had personally arranged for alternative transportation. He talked about the dozens of airport employees who had volunteered their time and the pilot who had donated her services. The reporter was visibly moved by the story and asked Marcus if he had any way to contact Thomas Washington. She wanted to include his perspective in her report and possibly arrange for him to speak with Danny's family. Marcus provided the contact information for Kansas City International Airport's security office, hoping that the story might bring some recognition to the man who had made such a difference. Later that evening, After the burial and the reception at the local community center, Marcus received an unexpected phone call on his hotel room phone. It was Thomas Washington, calling from Kansas City to check on how everything had gone and to express his condolences to Danny's family. During their conversation, Marcus learned more about Thomas's motivation for helping military families. The older man revealed that since losing his own son in Iraq, he had made it his personal mission to ensure that every fallen soldier who passed through Kansas City International Airport received the highest level of care and respect possible. "I couldn't save my own boy," Thomas said quietly over the phone, "but I can honor his memory by taking care of other families who are going through what we went through. Every time I help bring a soldier home, I feel like I'm doing something meaningful with the time I have left." Marcus was deeply moved by Thomas's words and told him about the interview with the local news reporter. He warned Thomas that the story might attract some media attention, but Thomas seemed unconcerned about publicity. His only concern was whether Danny's family was satisfied with how everything had been handled. When Marcus assured him that the family was grateful beyond words, Thomas seemed relieved and satisfied. Before ending the call, he asked Marcus to pass along his personal condolences to Danny's parents and to let them know that their son had been treated with the utmost respect and honor throughout his journey home. The next morning, as Marcus prepared to return to his base in Colorado, he received a visit from Danny's family at his hotel. They had brought him a small wooden box containing some of Danny's personal items that they wanted him to have as a remembrance: his military dog tags, a photo of him in uniform, and a letter he had written to his family before his final deployment. Mrs. Mitchell also handed Marcus a sealed envelope addressed to Thomas Washington. Inside was a handwritten letter from Danny's family, expressing their gratitude for his efforts and inviting him to visit Millbrook whenever he wanted to see Danny's final resting place. She had also included a photograph of Danny from his high school graduation, signed by the entire family. 3 weeks after Danny Mitchell's funeral, the local news story about his escort home had spread far beyond the small Nebraska town where he was laid to rest. Jessica Martinez's initial report had been picked up by national news networks, and the story of Thomas Washington's extraordinary efforts to help a fallen soldier reach his family had captured the attention of millions of Americans. The response was overwhelming and immediate. Kansas City International Airport's switchboard was flooded with calls from people wanting to thank Thomas personally. The airport's social media accounts were inundated with messages of support and gratitude. Local Kansas City television stations began running their own follow-up stories about the veteran security guard who had become an unexpected hero. Thomas found himself uncomfortable with the sudden attention. He had been working quietly at the airport for 15 years, helping military families whenever needed, never seeking recognition or publicity. His supervisor, Airport Security Chief Maria Santos, was amazed to learn about the scope of Thomas's volunteer efforts with military escorts, many of which had occurred during his own time and without official knowledge. During an interview with a Kansas City television station, Thomas maintained his humble demeanor despite the reporter's attempts to paint him as a hero. "I just did what anyone should do," he insisted, adjusting his security uniform as cameras rolled. "That young man served our country and paid the ultimate price. The least we could do was make sure he got home to his family when they needed him most." But the interviewer had done her research and knew that Thomas's efforts went far beyond the Danny Mitchell case. Through contacts at the airport and the Department of Defense, she had discovered that Thomas had personally assisted with over 40 military escorts during his tenure at Kansas City International. He had used his own vacation time to help with complicated logistics, spent his own money on hotel rooms for stranded escort soldiers, and had even driven his personal vehicle to transport military families when official transportation fell through. The story reached the desk of Congressman William Hayes, whose district included Kansas City International Airport. The congressman, himself a Navy veteran, was moved by Thomas's dedication and initiated the process to nominate him for the Presidential Citizens Medal, one of the highest civilian honors in the United States. Meanwhile, back in Nebraska, Danny's family had been following the news coverage with great interest. Mrs. Mitchell had been contacted by several media outlets wanting to interview her about Thomas's help, and she had gladly shared her perspective on how his efforts had made an impossible day bearable for their family. when we thought we might not be able to bury our son on the day we had planned, when his grandfather might not live to see Danny come home. This stranger in Kansas City moved mountains to help us, she told a CNN reporter during a phone interview. He didn't know us, he didn't know Danny, but he treated our son like he was his own family. That's the kind of person we need more of in this world. The story also reached the attention of the Tragedy Assistance Program for Survivors, TAPS, a national organization that provides support to military families who have lost loved ones. The organization's president, Patricia Williams, reached out to both Thomas and Danny's family to learn more about their experience and to explore ways to improve the support system for military escorts and families. During her conversation with Thomas, Patricia discovered that his efforts at Kansas City International Airport were part of an unofficial network of airport employees across the country who went above and beyond their regular duties to assist with military escorts. These employees, many of them veterans themselves, had been quietly working for years to ensure that fallen soldiers and their families received the respect and care they deserved. This revelation led to the development of a formal program within the airport industry to recognize and support these efforts. The Airports Council International, representing airports across North America, announced the creation of the Military Honor Program, which would provide training and resources to airport employees who wanted to volunteer for escort assistance duties. Thomas was invited to help develop the training curriculum for this new program, sharing his 15 years of experience and the lessons he had learned from helping dozens of military families. His first training session was held at Kansas City International Airport, where over 100 airport employees from across the region came to learn about proper protocols for assisting military escorts. During the training session, Thomas emphasized that the technical aspects of moving caskets and coordinating flights were only part of the mission. The real importance, he explained, was understanding the emotional weight that escort soldiers and military families carried, and finding ways to ease their burden during the most difficult moments of their lives. When you see a young soldier in dress uniform at your airport, you're not just looking at a person doing their job, Thomas told the trainees. You're looking at someone who is carrying the hopes and grief of an entire family. You're seeing someone who has volunteered to perform one of the most sacred duties in our military. Our job is to make sure they can complete that mission with dignity and honor. One of the trainees was Jennifer Collins, a TSA supervisor from Denver International Airport, who had been present when Marcus had originally departed with Danny's escort mission. She had been deeply affected by the story and had volunteered to drive 4 hours to Kansas City to attend Thomas's training session. During a break in the training, Jennifer approached Thomas to share her own experience with military escorts at Denver International. She had noticed that while most airport employees wanted to help in these situations, they often didn't know what they were allowed to do or how they could make a meaningful difference without interfering with official protocols. Thomas listened carefully to Jennifer's observations and realized that her experience was probably common across many airports. This insight led him to propose an addition to the training program that would include specific guidance for different airport departments, from TSA agents to baggage handlers to gate agents, explaining how each could contribute to supporting military escort missions. The success of the initial training session led to invitations for Thomas to speak at airports across the country. Despite his discomfort with public speaking and his preference for working behind the scenes, Thomas accepted these invitations because he understood that sharing his knowledge could help other military families in the future. His second speaking engagement was at Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport, where over 200 airport employees attended his presentation. During the session, Thomas shared the story of Danny Mitchell's escort in detail, explaining how different airport departments had contributed to solving the weather delay crisis, and how their collective efforts had made the difference between success and failure for the mission. 6 months after Danny Mitchell's funeral, Thomas Washington found himself standing in the East Room of the White House, wearing his best suit and feeling completely out of place among the distinguished guests gathered for the Presidential Citizens Medal ceremony. Beside him stood Danny's parents, Robert and Linda Mitchell, who had been invited to attend the ceremony and witness Thomas receive one of the nation's highest civilian honors. The journey to this moment had been surreal for Thomas. After the story of his efforts to help Danny's escort had gained national attention, The recognition had continued to grow. The Airport Council International had named him their Volunteer of the Year. The American Legion had presented him with their Distinguished Service Award. Multiple veterans organizations had honored him for his dedication to military families, but it was the Presidential Citizens Medal that truly overwhelmed him. When Congressman Hayes had called to inform him of the nomination, Thomas had initially tried to decline the honor, insisting that he had simply done what anyone should do in that situation. It had taken considerable persuasion from his family, Danny's parents, and even Marcus Rodriguez to convince him to accept the recognition. As President Biden entered the East Room and began the ceremony, Thomas thought about the chain of events that had brought him to this place. It had started with a young soldier in dress uniform looking frustrated in an airport, and a simple decision to ask if he could help. That single moment of compassion had rippled outward, touching thousands of lives and creating lasting change in how the nation honored its fallen heroes. During his remarks, the president spoke about the importance of citizens who serve their communities without seeking recognition or reward. He mentioned Thomas specifically, describing how his actions had exemplified the best of American values and had inspired others to find ways to serve military families in their own communities. Thomas Washington represents the quiet heroes who surround us every day, the president said, looking directly at Thomas as he spoke. His story reminds us that patriotism isn't just about grand gestures or public displays. Sometimes it's about a security guard who refuses to let bureaucracy stand in the way of bringing a fallen soldier home to his family. When Thomas was called forward to receive his medal, Mrs. Mitchell squeezed his hand and whispered, "Danny would be so proud." The simple words brought tears to his eyes as he walked across the room to stand before the President of the United States. After the ceremony, Thomas had the opportunity to meet with several other medal recipients and their families. He was struck by the diversity of their stories: teachers who had saved students during school shootings, civilians who had rescued people from burning buildings, volunteers who had dedicated their lives to helping the homeless. Each had answered a call to serve others, often at great personal cost. During the reception following the ceremony, Thomas was approached by General Patricia Morrison, the Army's Chief of Staff, who wanted to discuss the impact of his military honor program training sessions. She informed him that the program had been so successful that the Department of Defense was considering implementing similar training at military installations around the world. What you started at Kansas City International Airport has grown into something that's changing how we care for our fallen soldiers and their families, General Morrison told him. Your simple act of kindness has created a movement that will honor our military families for generations to come. Thomas also met with representatives from several foundations that were interested in expanding the military honor program. They wanted to provide funding for training programs at airports across the country and to establish a formal network of volunteers who could assist with military escort missions. One foundation representative, Sarah Chen from the Veteran Support Foundation, had a particularly compelling proposal. Her organization wanted to create a scholarship program in Danny Mitchell's name that would provide educational assistance to children of fallen soldiers. The scholarship would be funded through donations from airport employees and aviation industry workers who had been inspired by Thomas's story. Mrs. Mitchell, who had overheard the conversation, was deeply moved by the proposal. Through her tears, she expressed how meaningful it would be to have Danny's memory honored in a way that would help other military families pursue their dreams despite their losses. She immediately agreed to work with the foundation to establish the scholarship program. As the reception continued, Thomas found himself in conversation with Marcus Rodriguez, who had flown to Washington specifically to attend the ceremony. Marcus had been promoted since their experience together and was now responsible for training new escort soldiers. He told Thomas that Danny's story had become part of the curriculum he used to teach new escorts about the importance of their mission and the network of support that existed to help them succeed. Every soldier I train hears about what you did for Danny and for me that day, Marcus said. They learn that escort duty isn't just about following procedures. It's about being part of a community that honors our fallen heroes. Your example shows them that there are people across the country who understand the sacred nature of what we do. Marcus also shared that he had stayed in touch with Danny's family and had visited Danny's grave on the anniversary of his death. The small cemetery in Millbrook had become a place of pilgrimage for veterans from across the region, who came to pay their respects to the young soldier whose story had touched so many lives. Later that evening, after returning to their hotel, Thomas sat with the Mitchell family in the lobby, sharing stories and reflecting on the remarkable journey that had brought them together. Robert Mitchell, Danny's father, had remained largely quiet during the day's events, but now he opened up about how Thomas's actions had affected their family's grieving process. "When we thought we might not be able to bury Danny when we planned, when we thought his grandfather might not live to see him come home, you gave us hope," Robert said, his voice steady but emotional. "You showed us that there were still people in this world who cared about doing the right thing, even for strangers. That meant everything to us during the darkest time of our lives." Mrs. Mitchell added that Thomas's efforts had helped them focus on celebrating Danny's life rather than being consumed by logistical problems and delays. "Because of you, we could spend our energy saying goodbye to our son instead of fighting bureaucracy. That's a gift we can never repay." Thomas listened to their words with humility and gratitude, still struggling to fully comprehend how his simple decision to help had created such far-reaching effects. He thought about his own son, who had been killed in Iraq 8 years earlier, and how the pain of that loss had motivated him to help other military families avoid additional suffering whenever possible. 6 months later, Thomas received news that brought his journey full circle. The Danny Mitchell Memorial Scholarship had awarded its first scholarships to 5 children of fallen soldiers, providing them with financial assistance to attend college. One of the recipients was the daughter of a soldier who had been killed in the same attack that claimed Danny's life in Afghanistan. The scholarship ceremony was held at Kansas City International Airport, in the same terminal where Thomas worked every day. Airport employees, military officials, and the scholarship recipients and their families gathered to honor Danny's memory and celebrate the educational opportunities his legacy was providing. During the ceremony, Thomas was asked to speak about how a single act of kindness had grown into a lasting tribute to military service and sacrifice. As he looked out at the audience, which included many of the airport employees who had helped with Danny's escort mission, he was reminded of the power of ordinary people choosing to do extraordinary things. Danny Mitchell was 19 years old when he made the ultimate sacrifice for his country, Thomas said, his voice carrying clearly through the terminal. "He never got the chance to come home and go to college, to start a career, to raise a family. But through these scholarships, his sacrifice continues to make a difference in the lives of other military children who are pursuing their dreams despite their losses." As the ceremony concluded and the families dispersed, Thomas returned to his regular duties as a security guard. But he carried with him the knowledge that his work had meaning beyond checking identification and monitoring airport security. Every day he had the opportunity to serve military families and honor the memory of fallen soldiers, like Danny Mitchell and his own son. The military honor program he had helped create was now active at over 50 airports across the country, with hundreds of trained volunteers ready to assist with escort missions. The program had prevented countless delays and complications for military families during their most difficult moments, ensuring that fallen soldiers reached their final destinations with dignity and honor.